Being ayan. Okay, so I guess I just wanted to dive right into it na lang. Um so for this afternoon, what we have in store for you is actually we're gonna play a game, which is a climate action simulation game. And essentially the scenario is going to be that the UN Secretary General is calling for an emergency meeting of world leaders in order to ask them to brainstorm and negotiate how we can limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Um, so that's just a heads up for what will happen later on, and Rex will provide us with more details. But I guess I just wanted to spend a few minutes trying to um, walk us through why I think this scenario is actually not so far from our current reality, wherein we are already literally in the middle of a climate emergency on top of the other crises that we are also facing in with the pandemic and biodiversity loss, etc. And of course, also to wrap up my short talk, I'm just gonna give you some ideas about the milestones that we need to achieve in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Okay. Oh, thanks so much, Jean. All right. So now, as I mentioned, we are already in the middle of a climate emergency. And I guess the first piece of information that you need is that right now we are already at 1.1 degrees Celsius warming level compared to pre-industrial times. And at the same time, so hold on. So that's what we see here. So we're already at 1.1 degrees. And at the same time, the IPCC tells us that all of that 1.1 degrees Celsius can be attributed to human influence. So here, the green lines tell us how much warming would have been if there were only natural drivers, and how it is currently now observed when you combine both human and natural drivers. So with that, the IPCC concluded that it is unequivocal in very strong language that human influence has already warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land, and that at the same time, this kind of warming has been unprecedented. Okay, we just, all right. Okay, next. So now we are already at 1.1 degrees, right? But the IPCC actually also looked at 5 future emission scenarios. So that would be SSP 1-1.9 all the way to SSP 5-8.5. And this is, of course, the very low emission scenario, and this is the high emission scenario. But if you look at all 5, actually there are only 2 that allows us to stay below the 2-degree limit, which was agreed in the Paris Agreement. And only 1 scenario that allows us to stay below 1.5 degrees. And the catch is that actually, even for SSP 1-1.9, in the next 20 years, we are actually expecting to overshoot 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the question now is whether this overshoot is going to be temporary or permanent. Temporary, if we are able to follow this pathway. But for example, if we follow the current emission rate, then we are heading straight to a 3-degree warmer world. Okay, so how is that going to impact us? The thing is that climate scientists have found that, in fact, when we talk about climate impact, it's not something that's going to happen in the future. Instead, every region on Earth is already affected in multiple ways. So here you have a list of the different potential climate impact drivers. But specifically for Southeast Asia, what's pressing for us are mean air temperature, extreme heat, heavy precipitation, and pluvial flood, coastal flood and erosion, ocean acidity, marine heat wave, and relative sea level rise. Because all of these climate impact drivers are actually projected to increase in the future with high confidence. Now, let's dig a bit deeper into the 1.5 degree limit and why is it important for us to try and stay within that limit. So here, let's just zoom into the example of hot temperatures over land. And you can see here that currently at 1.1 degrees Celsius, in terms of frequency, the heat waves already occur 2.8 times compared to pre-industrial levels and is already 1.2 degrees hotter. So the frequency and intensity are increasing. But with 1.5 degrees, that will become 4.1 times more frequent and plus 1.9 degrees hotter. And with 2 degrees, you see an even higher increase in frequency as well as intensity. Another example would be droughts. So before, when we would, during pre-industrial times, when we would only have droughts once, now we already have droughts 1.7 times more frequent, and also the intensity is 0.3 standard deviations drier. And with 1.5 degrees, it's 2 times more likely, and 2 degrees, 2.4 times, and also drier. So essentially what this is saying is that every bit of warming counts, because with a little increase, with just a 0.5 degree Celsius increment, we are really going to see a huge difference, especially when looking at climate extremes in terms of frequency and intensity. So just as a last example, this is for heavy precipitation, and it's the same trend essentially. The frequency is higher for higher warming levels, and the intensity is also higher. So Rex and I are actually from Bohol, and the reason why we started Earth Ed PH was we somehow got together organically after we were affected by Typhoon Odette. So just as a background story, as mentioned by Jean earlier, I'm with Manila Observatory, right? I do climate studies and resilience studies for my work. And then with Super Typhoon Odette, it happened in December 16. So December 15, I was already trying to monitor this typhoon. In Bohol, we're actually used to having Christmas typhoons. That's our peak typhoon season around December. But I remember in December 15, before I went to sleep, we were just expecting a category 2 typhoon. But when I woke up December 16, I woke up very early because my colleagues from Manila Observatory kept ringing me, trying to warn me that the latest forecast says that the category 2 typhoon that's headed our way has now become a category 5 super typhoon. So the new forecast was released around 5 a.m. and the first landfall in Siargao was around 12 noon. So that there's a very short window for us to quote unquote prepare. And the photo that I'm showing you now is the aftermath of Super Typhoon Rai, Typhoon Odette, in one of our small islands, they were not able to cross to the mainland anymore because by the time that we knew about the Category 5 forecast, the sea was already very choppy, so they cannot cross anymore. So they had to stay in these islands, and they were directly hit. And they specifically suffered from 4-meter high storm surges. So this is what the island looked like a few days after. And this is the trend also with climate change. Even at 1.1 degree warming, we can already see much stronger typhoons, with more of our typhoons falling into the category 3 to 5 category. All right, so aside from extreme events in Bohol, we are also suffering from slow onset events. So here I'm showing a photo of the same island. During high tide, they experienced tidal flooding. And this is early impact of sea level rise. And aside from suffering from the losses and damages from both climate extreme events and slow onset events, their capacity for adaptation is also being compromised by higher warming levels. So, for example, coral reefs are already starting to hit their hard limits. And again, here I emphasize the difference between a 1.5 degree versus 2-degree world, wherein at 1.5, we stand to lose 70 to 90%, which is basically majority of our reefs. And for us is already unacceptable. But at 2 degrees, we stand to lose all. So we are expecting to experience ecosystem loss essentially at 2 degrees warming level. And yeah, as I said, now we are already at 1.1 degrees. So that is the current situation, and that is the crisis that we are in. And now I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about how we can approach it, what are the possible solutions to this problem. And also, as I said, to give you some milestones that we can work towards as we play our climate action simulation game later. All right, so in terms of climate solutions, the IPCC, I think this was just earlier this year, released the solutions framework that has 4 pillars. So the first pillar is adaptation, which is dealing with the effects of climate change. The second pillar is mitigation, which is dealing with the causes of climate change, which is greenhouse gas emissions. The third is sustainable development for everyone. So there's a very strong link with development as well as justice for this third pillar. And then the last pillar is ecosystem restoration. So I'm sure you already know, but this decade has been declared by the United Nations as the decade for ecosystem restoration. So as you can see from our solutions framework, it's really comprehensive. And what it means for us is that in order to deal with climate change, we really need systemic change as well. So this is a typical comic that you see when talking about the climate summit. And by the way, we are just a few months away from the next conference of parties, which will be in Egypt in November. So yeah, here you have a lot of proposed solutions like energy independence, preserving rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean air, clean water and air, healthy children, etc., etc. And before there used to be a lot of denialism. What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? But now that we are the climate emergency is upon us, and Even at 1.1 degrees, we are already suffering from climate extreme events and even early impacts of slow onset events, then we really cannot afford such denialism anymore. And as suggested by the solutions framework, we really have to think holistically about how to deal with climate change. All right, so this is actually my last slide, and this is my pabaon for you for the activity later. So if you recall earlier, I showed you 5 different future emission scenarios that were prepared by by the IPCC Working Group 1. And as I mentioned, out of the 5 emission scenarios, only 2 scenarios allow us to stay below 2 degrees, and 1 scenario that allows us to stay below 1.5 degrees. So presently, we are already here. And presently, we are emitting around 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year. And the first milestone that we have to hit if we are to follow this mitigation pathway is that around 2030s, we need to be able to cut our emissions in half. Okay, so this is why this decade is being called the critical decade for climate action, because of this first milestone that we need to achieve. But beyond 2030, so around 2050, 2060s, we actually have to achieve net zero emissions. Now, the term net zero has become kind of hijacked already, and it has come to mean many things for different people. But from the point of view of climate science, net zero simply means that whatever carbon you emit, you're also able to remove and absorb back, so that you have net zero emissions. But it doesn't stop there. This is just our second milestone. Beyond 2050, we actually have to be carbon negative. So this means that whatever carbon we emitted in the past, we have to be able to remove it and clean our atmosphere from those emissions. All right. So just to wrap up my short talk, I just like to leave you with some words from our UN Secretary General. So during the release of IPCC Working Group 2 report, this was what he said. So every nation will be impacted. Indeed, we're already seeing those impacts now, with heat waves, flooding, superstorms, droughts, and more threatening people's physical and mental health in rich, poor, and middle-income countries around the world. And the poorest and most marginalized of our communities will be hit the hardest. These palpable signs of the climate crisis and the resulting health emergency must serve to spur us towards transforming our food, energy, health, and transportation systems to make them fit for purpose. All right. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen. And before I turn over to Rex for the mechanics of the game, I was just wondering if you have any burning questions for me, clarification questions regarding the climate emergency and climate solutions.
So to our participants, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your virtual hand and then we will call you, or you may also type them in chat.
Okay, so I think we can also continue the discussion later. I hope this means that what I mentioned was clear to you. So now I'm just going to turn it over to Rex for the mechanics of this afternoon's game. Rex?
All right, Dr. Lau. All right. Can anyone confirm if they can see my screen?
Yes, we see it. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you
Yes.
very much. So yeah, this is the second part of our session for this afternoon. And um, if we review back the discussion of Dr. Lau, so it seems like we're given a big responsibility, and the task is really gargantuan for the humanity to limit our temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius, our increments. Yeah, and so now um, I would like to steer this part two. And this is a game called En-ROADS for Climate Action Simulation. So this tool was actually developed by our colleagues from the MIT Management and Climate Change Initiative of the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. And so basically, the En-ROADS Climate Action Simulation is a group role-playing game to explore solutions for mitigating climate change. So earlier, Dr. Lau presented our four approaches to achieve 1.5, and one thing is mitigation. So for this tool, we'll be proposing actions for mitigation. So supposedly, through En-ROADS, we will be role-playing as different stakeholders, specifically 8 stakeholders. But in the interest of this session and time, we'll be dividing the groups into 3, into different world government types, which I will be sharing later on. So basically, the En-ROADS is a cutting-edge simulation model to test climate solutions and generate climate scenarios for the future. And the calculation models are based basically on established equations and calculations. And this is actually grounded on this hierarchy. So basically, the En-ROADS is showing that the total greenhouse gases that is being emitted by everyone are from the energy CO2 emissions, land use CO2 emissions, CO2 removal, and other greenhouse gases. And particularly for energy CO2 emissions, the population, the consumption patterns, energy intensity, and carbon intensity contributes to this. And consequently, with the continuous increase of total greenhouse gas emissions, it will increase our temperature and finally the impacts. So as what Ms. Lau mentioned, even a bit of temperature increase will matter. So on this slide, it is elaborated actually the contribution of different energy CO2 emissions from different sources. So from 1850 to 2018, it is shown here that coal contributes most of the carbon dioxide emissions. And so related to this, and as what Dr. Lau mentioned, so if we continue to observe business as usual activities, we will shoot to 3.6 degrees Celsius, which we do not like to achieve. And so our main target today is to simulate or to propose actions to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius. Even reaching 2 degrees Celsius is already fearful, as shared by Ms. Lau, that 90% or even 100% of all coral reefs will be virtually vanquished or totally bleached. So this is our goal for today. So through the En-ROADS climate simulation tool, we will try to project and propose solutions to project the 1.5 degree Celsius temperature change. So as I've mentioned earlier, we will be dividing all participants into 3 groups according to different world government types. So particularly into developed countries, rapidly developing countries, and small island nations. So particularly, these are the specific countries that each participant or each group will role play. So if you will belong to developed nations, kindly take note that you will play as group leaders for Australia, Canada, and the other countries here. For rapidly emerging nations, these are China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and South Africa. And finally, for developing nations, South and Southeast Asia, the small island states, including Africa and Central and Latin America. So for the overall process, so basically, once you will be divided into 3 teams or 3 groups, you will try to propose your only top three actions, and you can add a new solution to the plan by changing the 18 levers or toggles on the En-ROADS tool, which I will be showing later, or even reverse a previous action that another group proposed. So you can also, if your role wants it to reverse the solution proposed by another group, then you can do so. This is the basic goal of this tool, to negotiate as well, to come up with a better plan. And when we try to create or propose our actions, try to consider multi-solving lens. So consider a near-term co-benefit from the proposal. So a guiding question, how can you address more than one problem with one action? So as much as possible, since we are only given our top 3 solutions, so kindly take note of that. And another one, how might you ensure that marginalized communities are not disproportionately burdened? So this is on the lens of equity. So later on, we will be sharing to you these multi-solving co-benefits copy and equity considerations for En-ROADS for your additional references. Ms. Jean will be sharing this to you once we start the game. Now, I will go to the actual En-ROADS simulation tool for the initial introduction. Can anyone see already? Another slide, thank you. Thank you for the
Yes.
confirmation. So actually, this is the actual En-ROADS climate simulation tool. So you can see there are different items here and also graphs. So I will show you how to work on this. So basically, as what I've mentioned, you can play on the toggles or the levers based on your proposed solution or action. And you can click on the 3 dots for elaboration of each item, and you can also specify different considerations. For example, for coal, if you want subsidy, then you can specify the start of subsidy year. So basically, we have 5 major groups of different items: energy supply, transport, building and industry, growth. 6, sorry, land and industry emissions and carbon removal. So basically, every group has the freedom to change or to adjust the toggles or levers according to their proposed solution. Similarly, you can also use the graphs to portray more the changes or the adjustments of your proposed solution. So for example, you can go to primary energy demand tools, and you can see a different graph on the left side. So you can play on this. For example, you want to check the carbon dioxide emission changes according to your proposed solution. So you can also see this on the left-hand side graph. remarkably, you can also check the graphs, and I recommend you also use these miniature graphs where you can see different graphs. And so when you change or adjust a toggle, for example, the carbon price, you want it to be very high, so you can see that the graphs will be changing. And so this is the effect of changing carbon price on the different items. You can also actually see the actual actions and outcomes immediately with your proposed solution or action. And importantly, if you want further guide, you can check related examples on the help section, and you can see different examples of ongoing and ideal proposals for the curbing of greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, for population, it's on women's empowerment and fertility rates, or for renewables, subsidies on clean energy. So you can consider that as you propose your solutions. All right. So just in case you want to change or you want to reset everything on your simulation tool, then you can just click this refresh and then it will be reset. So that's as easy as that. All right. Going back to our slides for the final instructions. Am I on my PPT now?
From my end, I'm still seeing the simulation dashboard.
All right. Thank you, Jean. All right. So after my introduction of the simulation tool, so let's go directly to the instruction. For the timetable, so the team meeting, each group will have the team meeting for 20 minutes. And so you will plan out all and discuss the top 3 discussions of your group according to each world government types. And afterwards, we'll go back here to the main room for the plenary session wherein each group will be given 5-minute presentation per group, and kindly choose the leader as well of your group. So kindly show us your top 3 policies and the actions and outcomes. And afterwards, we will have a debriefing and reflection for 10 minutes. So as I've mentioned, we will be breaking out for 20 minutes. Then each team will send up a delegate to make a 5-minute speech, so you can add a new solution or reverse an action. Then I will input each action into the En-ROAD simulation tool, and then our simulation game will end when we finish our when we achieve our climate goals or run out of time. So during the team meeting, kindly take note that you can talk with your team for your overall strategy and discuss specifically about the agreement on the details like level of change, start year, so as what I have shared to you earlier, and then select your delegate or your leader for the 5-minute speech for the plenary meeting. And you may also consider these questions when you formulate your top 3 policies. So your interests or the interests of your world government type, what is politically feasible, what can you offer them, what is a near-term co-benefit from your proposal, and how to ensure that vulnerable communities are not disproportionately affected by your proposal in view of equitable development. And importantly, you may take note of this system dynamics also when you work on or adjust on the toggles. So you can consider capital stock turnover, price demand feedback. So the price, demand, and supply are linked, as we all know, or even crowding out. So low carbon supplies may compete for long-term market shares, or another one is squeezing the balloon. And also economies of scale and learning, and importantly also the drivers of growth like population and GDP growth. And finally, bathtub dynamics. So of course, to achieve 1.5, the removal of CO2 concentration should be higher than the CO2 emissions that we have right now. And so that ends my instructions for the climate simulation tool. Do we have any question for now before we move to our separate breakout groups? Any burning questions?
For clarifications about the activity. So maybe the questions will crop up now once we once we start going into the activity. Okay, we have assigned you to your breakout rooms. We've assigned you manually, so there are now 3 breakout rooms that we will be opening in a bit. I've also posted in chat the link to the Google folder that contains the files that you will be needing for the team meeting. Doc Lau has also posted in chat the link to the En-ROAD simulation in case you want to try it out during your team meeting. Okay, so we will now open the breakout rooms, and you can meet with your team members for 20 minutes and after which, so please be sure to assign a leader for your team who will be presenting the speech. And afterwards, after 20 minutes, we will be closing the breakout room for everyone to be back here in the main room. Okay, so opening the breakout rooms now. For those who are still in the main room, maybe know if you have any problems moving. Baka minsan there's just a lag moving from the main room to the breakout room.
Okay.
Mm-mm. Doc Lau, I think I assigned you. Gusto mo magpunta sa breakout room? Nasa ano ka? Develop. If you would like to.
Later na lang siguro. So, actually,
All right.
so to give them time to do their own thing.
All right. Okay.
But I'll check on them later.
So, Prof. Ruth, do you need any assistance po moving to the breakout room? Mm. Prof. Ruth, if you're there, we have assigned you po to the developed nations. If you would like to join also their discussion. Thank you. Sige, ikot-ikot din ako. Check it out ko lang sila.
Sige, Jean, see you.
Thank you.
Hi, Zinwe. Do you know which group you're assigned to so I can push you back?
I don't know. Currently, I'm in other occasion at the same time.
Ah, okay. I see. I see.
I missed the first part.
Oh, no worries. All right. Let me just see if I can push you back to. Okay. So you're in the small island nations group.
But I don't know what to discuss.
Yeah.
Is there other breakout room, because my country is not a small island?
Ah, okay, sure. So the others are emerging and also developed. So it's more of a role-playing game, actually.
Ah,
How about emerging?
yeah,
Let me.
that's
Okay, so I'll move you to emerging and see if you feel like you're more comfortable in it.
yeah. Okay,
Okay,
okay. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, so we're slowly moving back into the main room. I hope the discussion was fruitful in your respective breakout rooms. I think yung emerging, they are still maybe in the thick of their discussion. Bilang emerging countries sa land, so much is at stake for them. All right. I think we're all here. Yes, so we now proceed to the part where the speakers from each of the breakout rooms, right, will be presenting their priorities.
Yes. Thank you, Jean. So perhaps, yeah, thank you once again for all the groups for working on your proposals and the adjustments on the climate simulation tool. So perhaps we can start from the developed nations. The world leaders from the developed nations. Who is your representative? From Australia, Canada, EU, Japan?
Hi, that would be me.
Yes, go ahead, Daniel.
All right. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes, go ahead, Daniel. We've enabled your co-hosting
Thank
credentials.
you very much. All right. So earlier, the caucus of developed nations, we were discussing which three key actions we can take as our contribution to the global efforts for keeping the temperature increase to a minimum. So our first target was population growth. We wanted to aim for a low growth. We felt that toggling towards a lowest growth scenario might be too unrealistic. So we kept into the middle range of the low growth. So that was to move the projected population from 10 to 9.5 billion people by the end of the century in 2100. Our second action was for increasing the subsidy for renewable energy. So we wanted to go for the maximum to highly subsidize renewables. So the maximum came out at 3 cents per kilowatt hour for a high subsidy scenario. We wanted to maximize the options here. And then for the renewables, R&D breakthrough cost reduction, as well as for storage R&D breakthrough cost reduction, we kept it at a conservative amount of 10%. We felt that that was a realistic rate of cost reduction as the years and as the R&D breakthroughs go by. Our third action was for carbon removal technology. We felt that as the developed nations who have more economic resources, we would be the caucus that would be best equipped to invest in this technological breakthrough. So for carbon removal technology, we wanted to max out the option for this. So 100% potential of carbon removal technology. So we marked that as the high growth scenario. So overall, from our baseline, we were able to reduce the projected increase of temperature from 3.6 degrees to 2.9 degrees. So it's still a ways off from the ideal range, which makes us even more excited to see what the other caucuses of nations have also proposed. So I'll stop sharing now.
Yes, any reactions, initial reactions from the group? Thank you, Daniel, for the presentation. All right, so I guess we'll just have more discussions later on after the groups have presented. So we'll move on to the emerging group. emerging nations represented by world leaders from China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and South Africa. Sir Celso, sorry.
Yes, Sir Celso, we gave you co-hosting credentials, so you may also share your screen.
Good afternoon. The presentation is with Sir Rex po ba kanina?
All right, I'll try to share my screen.
Yes, sir. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah, you may go ahead with the discussion, Sir Celso.
Okay. Thank you, sir. For the emerging group, the options we selected is on the shift from fossils to renewable resources in terms of energy, and we place subsidized option for the renewables, and the subsidy would start on this year 2022 and up to 2100s. And the another activity in terms of transport is on the electrification of the transport system, wherein we consider to highly incentivize that to 60%. And the project would start this year. And for the electrification of new transport system with new technologies using air and water by 50%. Another option we selected is the reducing the deforestation incidents up to 10%, which is considered to there will be high reduction of deforestation starting 2022. And the another option by the group is to have afforestation. So afforestation, and we plan to afforest the available land to 50% for this year, up to 2100s. And another thing is we need to, a while ago we have discussion in terms of carbon removal, in terms of technology. We agreed to have a 50% or medium growth technological carbon removal. And then kanina sir doon sa carbon tax, carbon price, no. For the carbon price, no, we cap the cost of carbon to $50 per ton. So with this amount, you would highly reduce the temperature to 2.6 degrees centigrade with the combination of other options we recommend. And that's the output of the emerging group. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Celso. So the changes, the temperature increase was limited to 2.6 for the
0.6
emerging group, whereas for the developed nations, that was 2.9. Is it correct, Daniel?
Yes, 2.9.
All right, thank you. And we'll move forward with the developing nations group.
Our presenter is Arnulfo, but I'll be sharing the screen.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our group discussed the subjects on the use of solar energy as the forefront of the reducing of the temperature, as well as deforestation and the population growth should be decreased also. I was not able to see there was a technology to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, so I was not able to capture that, ma'am. But if that is the case, then we will go for it, ma'am, 100%. Unfortunately for deforestation, lagi tayong tinatamaan ng bagyo, so the trees are uprooted every once in a while. So we cannot really just replace it because the trees will grow, will have a lot of years to grow and be able to curb down the temperature increase. But of course, I also suggested that we could also tax coal and oil prices the most so that we can also diminish the use of them. So that's about all, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arnulfo. Over to you, Rex.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lau. All right, so thank you for the presentation. So basically, we can see that there are differing policies from each group, from specifically for each and temperature increase ranges. So 2.9 for developed nations, 2.6 for emerging nations, and 3.2 for developing nations. So after these presentations, will be moving forward to the debriefing or reflections. So from the results, do we have any reflections, surprises, or any changes that you would have liked to propose or adjustments to decrease more the temperature increase? Anyone can answer?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, yes. This is on behalf of the developed nations group. So maybe some initial reflections while we were doing the activity. We were sort of surprised why we weren't making that much headroom in terms of emissions reductions or projected or at least reductions in projected increase. And then it was only after we had settled on our first three that we tried to toggle the others just to see how it would play around with the three factors that we had already chosen. And then we were very surprised at how large the effect of carbon price was on really everything else, because while we had clicked the highly subsidized option for renewables, it only brought down the and it didn't really bring down the energy share of coal and oil that much. But once we have the carbon price, just a slight toggle to the right, and the graph becomes very sensitive to this change. So if, let's say, for example, we have the highly subsidized scenario, and then we just go to the lowest possible, very high carbon pricing scenario, that brings down the temperature increase by 0.6 degrees, which is almost the same amount as we originally decreased from our first three actions. So it's quite interesting to see the interplay of those.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Indeed, it's the system is very complex, and it's really surprising how the temperature increase or decrease.
Rex, maybe I can jump into that. So actually, basically what that is saying is that it pays more to reduce emissions than focusing on removing emissions. So for example, actually carbon removal technology is essentially non-existent yet. We still have to develop the technology, and yet it's very true. Mostly from the developed nations are promising GHG reductions via removal technologies that don't yet exist. And again, it's focusing on removing. It's not focusing on cutting the emissions of the developed countries. And Arnulfo also mentioned earlier that, if you plant trees, trees take time to grow. And trees also focus on removing emissions from the atmosphere and storing it underground. But when it comes to carbon pricing, it really gives the incentive. I think you priced it at $50 per ton. So that's actually the ideal, between $50 to $100, no euros per ton. And then that will provide the incentive for companies to become cleaner, to become more efficient, to reduce their emissions in the first place. And I think that's why you can see in the tool, if you focus on reducing the emissions, it pays more compared to focusing on the removal side.
Thank you for the elaboration, Dr. Lau, and thank you also, Daniel, for the discussion. Any other reflections or surprises? Any proposals for negotiation, if there is?
Would just also like to echo kanina from the developed nations when we finally saw we saw that it was only 2.9 degrees na reduce, even if we thought that we were putting forward ambitious proposals for the ones that we toggled. Yan, she also typed it in chat from Ma'am Louie na it would be good for the different states to work together, not just for the solution of one category of state to be put out there, but maybe for the different states to work together, na hindi pwedeng yung priority lang ng isang category. It's that the priority of one category will be the one that will overpower or will only be considered. Reading from chat also, it shows that all sectors must take actions to achieve net zero. There, thank you.
Yes, very, very true. Thank you, Jean and Miss Louie. Any other final discussions, perhaps?
I think Sir Rex froze, or is it just from my end? I'm not sure. Maybe he's done. I think he was freezing.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Shachi, but I really appreciated your reflection earlier about the tool, and how it can be used in the local context. So if you could share that with the group, we would really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Again, I am Shati Chong, and I am the Secretariat Lead of the Himalayan University Consortium based in Kathmandu, Nepal. I am also a coordinator of a hub, WCRP My Climate Risk hub in the Hindu Kush Himalaya. So thank you again for this opportunity to learn about this tool. I find it's very useful for teaching climate change and sustainability from global as well as the country perspective. My reflection, I'm totally new to the tool itself, and again, I learned a lot from your session today. My reflection from the region where I'm come from is that the diversity of countries in the region, here we have China, India, Pakistan, and then we have a sort of less developed or least developed country. Bangladesh is about to graduate from that, but then we have Nepal, Bhutan, which is tiny, small in terms of population, and then Myanmar as well. We have a colleague from Myanmar here in the group. So and Afghanistan, those countries are actually being deeply affected by many other issues apart from climate change issues, but also the political turmoil and uncertainty of any other aspect in terms of migration. So looking into the context, I realized that The tools is globally appropriate, if you do hypothetically in the classroom, when you ask your students to present, chose the country and the leagues where they come from in terms of developed, developing, emerging, and least developed as a hypothetical cases or a negotiation table. However, thinking of your own country condition, like if I am teaching this topic in Nepal, for example, then the questions will come from my student that, look, we are known, in Nepal, we are known as a community forestry program for a couple of decades already. And now renewable energy is picking up because, again, the water resources, we are just at the foothill. We are actually in the Himalayas with a huge potential for renewable energy resources. But then many other solutions in the tools may not speak to us, meaning to the country where we're from, and looking at also issues such as growth and population. So I've heard from one of our participants in the breakout group that, growth and population growth is one of the key issues when probably you speak from countries with high number of population and high rate of population growth, as well as urbanization. But countries where we are from that actually suffering from maybe the stagnant in terms of population growth, urbanization is not as fast. So I mean, we relate differently to the tool. So this is my reflection, which is important to draw attention to your classroom, anyone classroom that, diversity in the globe is experienced differently. I'm sure colleagues from Africa probably think in a very similar way that, they suffer from drought, for example, but at least, urbanization is really differently experienced in those countries and even in different cities or parts of the country or continent like Africa or these regions. So just sharing with you. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Sachi. I'm really fascinated with all of the different approaches that you're applying in Nepal and how you compare that, as you mentioned, with the other countries as well. Essentially, I guess the bottom line is that we're all trying to contribute in our own way based on what's applicable in our local context. So I think that's also the wisdom of the nationally determined contributions in the Paris Agreement. So there's really no one size fits all solution for climate change, and with the NDCs, every country is allowed the freedom to decide, which particular approach they will take as appropriate. And hopefully everyone, I think it's legally binding, so everyone will try as much as possible to deliver on their nationally determined contributions. Thank you, Sachi. All right, any burning questions? Here we have on chat additional input from Arnulfo. So I think the developed nations will help a lot in curbing the global temperature increases. The technology, they have the money and the technology to do it. Thank you. Response from the developed nations. Developed nations group. Are you willing to take on the challenge? The leadership challenge?
Hi, yeah, so it's me again from speaking on behalf of the Caucus of Developed Nations. Yes, actually, thank you for pointing that out, Sir Arnulfo. Actually, one of our jokes earlier was that we're taking on the role of an ideal version of developed countries who are so willing to, shell out all of the resources that we have historically accumulated as a result of, being able to be given the license to quote unquote pollute the planet. And in fact, one of our observations earlier was that despite the fact that developed nations tend to have a slower or negative growth in population, we still wanted to toggle on that option because we felt that from our standpoint, it could be a way for us to subsidize similar efforts in emerging economies and developing nations.
Thank you, Daniel. If only we live in an ideal world and it's easy to convince developed nations to shell out money. All right. I think with that, Rex, is there anything else?
Yeah, I think just a personal reflection as well. So I was struck with what Miss Tui said, that yeah, everyone, all sectors should work together. So it means that not only developing nations or developed nations should work together, but it's multi-stakeholder. So this means that there should be a clear negotiation among all nations, but of course we should take note of equitable development. So we should always bear in mind the rights also of indigenous people and all those in the peripheries. Yes. And yeah, what I guess this tool empowers us and suggests that we can do a plan and we can do it. We can turn it into a reality. So we can do it and we must do it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rex, and thank you so much, everyone, for being very participative in our climate action simulation game. We hope you use this tool, and we hope you learned a lot from this session. So with that, turning it over to Eugene for the closing.
Yes, all right. So thank you very much, Doc Lau and Sir Rex again, and to the participants. If it's okay with you, maybe ask you to turn on your cameras if you're able to, and we'll just take a souvenir photo. All right, I'm taking it now in 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much. So to close, we will be playing, actually she's here, but she also prepared a recorded closing remarks for today before we end the session and before we end the day, for at least for the conference, and see you again tomorrow. So closing will be by Dr. Asunta Kuyageng, who is the Executive Director of the ASEAN University Network on Ecological Education and Culture.
Hello, everyone. We hope you had a fruitful time during this session and the conference as a whole. On behalf of the Conference Secretariat, I would like to thank you for participating in the events today. We hope that the lecture and panel discussions gave you insights on what we can learn from those who came before us, from those who understood that they were part of the natural world and that their activities impacted not only the environment, but their own societies and resources. We hope that the lectures and panel discussion tomorrow will also inspire you to become engaged as citizens who will help define a more positive future. This afternoon was more focused on your interests. We hope that the session gave you ideas for your own work as well as ideas for collaboration. Special thanks to Dr. Luis Hamero for facilitating this session. And to all the participants, thank you for making time for this session. As we end this conference, we invite you to join us in the future activities of the ASEAN University Network on Ecological Education and Culture. Stay safe and well. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay.
So with that, we thank everyone again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. See you again tomorrow. We will start the session at 9 a.m. Philippine time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
for those who are still in the room, we will, okay, wala na in the room. Okay, hindi ko na na-share yung
Yay!
slides.
Congrats!
Kalimutan ko. Yes, okay, day 1 done. Tomorrow ulit.
Yes! Woo! Eh, naka-record pa tayo?
Ay, oo.
Ay, hindi na.
Stop.
Or naka-record?